Hello, everyone. I'm Rachel Timmermans, the Vice President External of the Students Association of Mount Royal University, and I'd like to welcome students, staff, faculty, and community members to SAMRU's Ward 8 Candidates Forum. I want to say thank you to all of you for signing in today, and a big thank you to our candidates for making the time to engage with students in this municipal election. Before we begin, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. I often find land acknowledgements have turned into a bit of a checkbox. People make sure to give a standard statement and move on without giving it much thought. I'm going to add a little bit of a personalized statement to my land acknowledgement today. Throughout my terms as SAMRU VP External, my eyes have been opened up to how much I didn't know or understand about colonization and what reconciliation truly means. I have come to learn how colonization impacted and continues to impact the Indigenous peoples of Canada. But I have also begun to learn about the detrimental impacts colonization has had and continues to have on all of us. Because we are all victims of colonization, this reinforces the fact that it is the responsibility of each and every one of us to continually push forward and take steps towards reconciliation. While the government does play a role in reconciliation, until we all take ownership of the society and structures we have allowed to form around us, we will all continue to suffer the impacts of colonization. I hope you take a moment today to reflect on how you have been affected by colonization and consider what steps you are taking towards reconciliation in your own life. We are fortunate to be gathered here today on Treaty 7 lands, including the Niitsitapi or Blackfoot Confederation, including the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani, the Tsuut'ina Nation, the Stoney Nakoda Nations of the Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Wesley, and Métis Nation 3. We are all treaty people. For today's forum, we will begin with prepared questions that were provided to the candidates on Friday evening. We will be accepting questions from students online throughout the forum. Please put your questions in the comment section of the Facebook live stream. All student questions will be grouped with similar questions so as to avoid repeats. The forum will run as follows. Candidates will be given 2 minutes to introduce themselves and their respective platform. Candidates will be given 2 minutes to respond to each question, after which each candidate will be given a 1-minute rebuttal to the question presented. Once we have exhausted our questions, candidates will be given 1 minute for closing remarks. Now, our moderator today is certainly known to our policy students and any media joining us today. Duane Bratt has taught at Mount Royal University for over 20 years and is an associate professor in the Department of Economics, Justice, and Policy Studies. He is also a well-known political commentator in media outlets across the province. I hope you will all join me in giving a warm welcome to our moderator for today's forum, Dr. Duane Bratt.
Everybody, thanks for that introduction, Rachel. I will begin by giving a brief bio of each of the candidates, and then I will, in a different order, open it up for the candidates to give an opening statement. So joining us today are 7 of the candidates for Ward 8. Monique Auffrey is a former CEO of Discovery House, Cara and Family SOS, a past lecturer at Dalhousie University, and the current Secretary General of the Commonwealth Organization for Social Work. Monique is a registered social worker. Gary Bobovitz is the current president of Bobavitz Communications and a former broadcast journalist with Global News. Yogi Henderson holds a Bachelor of Science Civil Engineering from the University of Manitoba and a Master of Science International Economics and Business from the Stockholm School of Economics in Sweden. He did their master's thesis in strategic innovation, creating new market space. Yogi's professional experience includes being a civil engineer, project manager, cost engineer, working in the power line construction industry, being a former oil and gas project controls analyst, and as a former hockey referee for the Western Hockey League and the National Hockey League. Paul Bergman, for the past 20 years, has operated a successful home building company that has championed a number of community-focused initiatives. Paul has done this while also actively speaking against selling Calgary's park space and against the current council's guidebook for great communities. Courtney Walcott is a teacher, equity and diversity facilitator, anti-racism advocate, community organizer, and coach. Cornelia Wiebe is proud to call Ward 8 her home. She is a business owner in the Ward's 17th Avenue district and has spent 20 years strengthening her business skills, making tough decisions, navigating risk, and finding success and amid economic uncertainty, and is ready to bring those skills to City Hall. She believes the next Ward 8 councillor should demonstrate a history of service to this ward. She has been engaged in civic matters, supporting the Uptown 17th Avenue revitalization and rebrand, and is an active member within the Ward 8 small business community. Natalie Winkler holds a Bachelor of Journalism and Women's Studies from Carleton University and a law degree from the University of Calgary. Currently, Natalie is a non-practicing lawyer and a member of the Law Society of Alberta. We will now go for opening statements from each of the candidates, and I will, for 2 minutes maximum, I will give warnings at 30 seconds and at 10 seconds, and we will begin with Paul Bergman.
Good morning, Duane, and thank you very much to the Mount Royal University Students Association for hosting this, and thank you to the other candidates for being here as well. As you know, my name is Paul Bergman, born and raised in Ward 8. I live in the ward now as well. I have gone to elementary, junior, and senior high school in the ward, and then went to University of Western Ontario to get my degree in economics. So I've spent the last 20 years living in and around the ward. I'm raised my boys here. One of my boys has gone to Western, just graduating last week. So my impetus for getting involved with this race is that I've spent the last 6 years on a volunteer committee watching what's going on at City Hall. And I believe that my extensive experience as a home builder, plus other experience previous to the last 20 years, makes me a good fit to accomplish a couple of things down at City Hall that I'd like to see happen. I'm concerned about community engagement. I don't think it's been done well. I'm concerned about our financial position. I think we have some really potentially huge problems 30 years from now, and they need to be taken care of now. I'm concerned about crime and safety, particularly on our LRT lines. And so I back the blue and the social programs that sit under that budget. And finally, I'm very concerned.
30 seconds.
I'm very concerned about how City Council conducts their business. I think as a $4 billion corporation, we need to add a little professionalism and decorum to
the clock just went dark.
Professionalism and decorum to the process. So thank you very much for allowing me to introduce myself.
Thank you, Paul. We will now turn it over to Gary Bobovitz.
Thank you to everyone at MRU, and nice to see you again, Dr. Bratt. I'm Gary Bobrovitz. I was City Hall reporter at Global Television, a provincial political journalist who knows how City Council works, and I will use that experience to get the job done for the people of Ward 8. I'm also a community builder. I live in Cliff Bungalow Mission, just off the Red Mile, and I helped to create the Lilac Festival. My parents were Ukrainian immigrants. They came to this country for a better life, and they taught me the values of hard work and honesty. I never forgot who I was or where I came from. I went to university to get a better life and have more As an investigative journalist, I fought for the underdog, the homeless, the LGBTQ community, and I gave a voice to marginalized Calgarians who had no voice. And I'm proud of my record and accomplishments as a journalist. My priority is to stop the brain drain, and it's real. I have 2 children, born, raised, and educated in Calgary, and they are now working in Ontario. That hurts me as a father, and it makes me angry as a Calgarian. Educated young people are the future of our community, and I'm going to push City Council to create positive public policies so young people can follow their dreams, their hopes, and their passions right here in Calgary. I'm a fighter, a cancer survivor, a world champion powerlifter. I asked tough questions when I was a journalist, and I'm still going to ask those tough
30
questions
seconds.
if I become the Ward 8 councillor. I want to make lives better. Your life, my life, our children's lives. I ask that you work with me, and together we can build a better future in a city with opportunities and livable, sustainable communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. We will now turn it off to Monique Auffrey.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much. I'd like to begin by recognizing that I'm a Francophone Acadian from the original lands of the Mi'kmaq in New Brunswick. I have been a CEO for the last decade. I started my career teaching actually as a teacher's assistant in the school board, working with children with special needs, and then as a student support worker. After becoming a social worker in Halifax and beginning my career, I continued to be involved with the post-secondary institutions that I was a student of, St. Mary's and Dalhousie, and had the pleasure of being a sessional instructor at Dalhousie University. My interest in joining City Council is to bring a positive, collaborative, and informed perspective to the table. I've done it all with regard to social justice. I've worked in food security. I've worked in women's shelters. I've worked with youth. I started youth-based programs, and I have a daughter who's 19. So amongst some of the areas that the city is currently involved in that are very important to me are the mental health and addiction strategy that was in part started by Karen Gosby, amongst others in the city, and some other initiatives related to social well-being. I do believe that youth are our future. As I've mentioned, I have a 19-year-old daughter. She is a student at MRU and has a class this afternoon.
30 seconds.
Thank you. I think our youth need to feel involved and to participate fully in the process and need to feel safe in doing so. So I'm thrilled to be here today. Those are my opening remarks, and I cannot wait for your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Monique. We will now hear from Courtney Walcott.
Hi, everybody. I wish we could be there. I'm a MRU alumni myself, actually, so I was really looking forward to sitting inside of Wickham House and having this conversation in person, but I'm glad to be able to be doing it here. I'm a teacher at Western Canada High School down on 17th, and for me, Calgary is a very interesting thing because I came here from Toronto about 16 years ago for the opportunities that Calgary offered me. And I can't turn away from the fact that my success, it came from a place of support, and it came from a place of leadership where people were actually supporting me in everything that I did. And that's actually how I ended up becoming a teacher. It's because I believe that education, and I believe that these support systems that exist in society are the ones that are going to help our next generation move forward. So why I got into this council race is very simple. It's actually just that at the end of grade 12, so many of my students end up graduating and moving to a different city. And I had to ask some pretty hard questions about what is it that we are building here that our next generation doesn't want to be a part of. And on average, it's always opportunities and a really hard thing to pinpoint, but culture. So my goal is when I started looking toward the solutions of how we actually keep a generation of people here so we can lift the foundation that helps everybody succeed in Calgary, it always came back to City Council. The people that sit around that table, they're the people that decide what our city is going to look like in 4 years, what our city is going to look like in 50 years. And more importantly, they're the ones that are going to determine if we are sustainable, both socially, economically, as well as environmentally. And my goal is to bring my experience as a community advocate with anti-racism systems change, where I've worked directly with City Council as well as just honestly my perspective of what this next generation needs and how we can bring them and put them
10
at
seconds.
the table when building our city further. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Courtney. We'll now hear from Cornelia Wiebe.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is Cornelia Wiebe, and I am also running to be your Ward 8 City Councillor here in Calgary. My background, I'm a small business owner, and I have been for over 20 years in this ward. I have a clothing retail store down on 17th Avenue called Leo Boutique. I have been working with so many of you in my business there and spending time doing a lot of work within the Beltline community out Mount Royal as well. I'm also a parent. I've been raising my family here in the ward. I've spent a lot of time volunteering within our communities, both through school, sports, and community programs. I am very sure that over the next several years, every level of government is in agreement that we need to support small business for an economic recovery. That to me is a key piece that I'm going to bring forward as a skill set on City Council, both as a small business owner where I can lend my business leadership experience, and also as a parent where so many of you are wondering to yourselves, where do I see myself in this city in the future? I think that absolutely relies on a response from City Council, and that is an area that I believe I can also do incredible work to bring a new economic recovery to the city that fosters a place for all of us to want to live, work, and play within the ward. Thank you so much, and I look forward to answering more of your questions here today.
Okay, thank you, Cornelia. We'll now hear from Natalie Winkler.
Hi, Dr. Bratt. Thank you so much for being the moderator. Thank you to Rachel for your lovely land acknowledgement. I appreciate that very much. I am a 20-year resident of Ward 8. I came to Calgary at the age of 23, U-Haul across the Rockies, and I came here for law school. My mother helped me pack up all my belongings, and Calgary was the place where the best and the brightest wanted to be in Canada. I was very excited to move here because I think Calgary is still a place where it's what you know and how hard you work, not who you know. And I attended law school here, and I met a Calgarian, and I've lived all over the ward and only in Ward 8, coincidentally. And when I first moved here, I lived behind the shipping anchor in the Beltline, and I now live in the Marda Loop area. And the part of my resume that I am the most proud of, the work that I've done in my life, is that after first year law school, I worked with Professor Kathleen Mahoney, and I helped residential school survivors have their stories heard. And many of them were in ill health, and they couldn't wait for the government of Canada to set up the claims process. And this was the most humbling and formative work of my lifetime. And I realized at that point that my calling in life is to help people have their voices heard. And that's why I'm running in this election, because I have been living in Ward 8 for 20 years, and I have listened to people, and I've heard that they are unhappy
30 seconds.
With their voices not being heard at City Hall. And I'm interested in restoring the quality of life so that our youth will want to stay in the ward and participate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalie. And we'll now hear from Yogi Henderson.
Hello, thanks for letting me be part of this debate today. Just like to introduce myself. My name is Yogi Henderson, and you can take jabs at that name if you'd like. I'm a proud Winnipegger who's been out in Calgary here for about 25 years. Through my 25 years, I slipped back to Winnipeg to do my engineering degree at the University of Manitoba, and I also spent 3 years living in Stockholm, Sweden. Throughout the years, I've volunteered here in Calgary for over 10 years. Worked and volunteered at the United Way of Calgary and area, and I worked with mayoral candidate Jan Demery at the time. That was one of my stints in there, and I've also, for over 10 years, I volunteered with the Calgary Special Olympics with floor hockey and baseball. I've got oil and gas experience as a projects and controls analyst. And like a lot of others, I was flushed out of the industry, and I now find myself 5 years later working in the power line industry. We are currently working on a project up in Northern Ontario, giving power to 22 First Nations communities for the first time ever. So yeah, I'm looking forward to being here. I first got into politics 6 years ago. Some of you may remember I ran as an independent here in Calgary Centre. I was inspired actually by Bernie Sanders, not necessarily with his policies, but the fact a lot of people don't realize that Bernie was a lifelong independent. So that's why I ran. Just wanted a chance to make a difference with people here. I think bring a lot of great qualities with my engineering and business and international business and finance background. And I think I can challenge or confront things intelligently. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks again for the opportunity, and look forward to talking to you all.
Okay, thank you, Yogi. So that concludes the introductions. Before we go to our first question, I'd just like to say that not only do I work in Ward 8, but I live in Ward 8, as do many faculty and students and staff. So there is a clear interest in this forum this afternoon. We will now go to the first question. And the first person to answer will be Paul Bergman. You have 1 minute. What is your vision for the future of Calgary's transportation network, Paul?
Thank you, Duane. Clearly, we have lots of options here in Calgary. We've got transit, cars, bikes, and more recently, Uber and e-scooters, which are all fantastic forms of transportation. I think we have to use those where appropriate. Certainly, bike lanes make good sense in parts of the city down in the Beltline. But I'm not sure they make as much sense taking away traffic lanes out in Northland Drive or Southland Drive. So the LRT is a fantastic LRT system, but I think we need to be careful about the financial risk that a $12.5 billion green line would put on the city. Clearly, we've got lots of options, and we need to expand those options that are not car-based. I think we slowly need to move away from those and provide options for our community members, but we need to do so in a staged, rational manner without spending a lot of money building unused or infrastructure that won't be used efficiently out at the edges of the city. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Paul. We will now give the same question to Gary Bobovitz. Go ahead, Gary.
Thank you, Dr. Bratt. I have a vision, but I also have a practical view of transportation. I want to expand train service to Mount Royal University. I'm shocked that a facility that has tens of thousands of people on site would not have a dedicated transportation system. And the same city planners that failed on that also did not provide for train service to the airport. Both are long overdue. I want to fight to ensure that Calgary Transit's overhead costs and fares are lowered while protecting service and reliability. And I want to take this forum to make an announcement of a new policy that I will bring to City Council in November if I'm elected. It's called Buck a Ride. Calgary Transit lost $90 million last year through COVID and the oil price shock. We have to get Calgarians back on the system. A buck a ride, $1 fare for 3 months to get people riding again on our public systems. I'd like to have that start on December 1st when winter kicks in and the weather is cold, and then we could review it after 90 days. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Same question for Monique.
Thank you. My vision for the future of Calgary's transportation network is that it be safe, accessible, and usable. I've supported the Green Line all along. I understand that financial commitments and whenever there are big infrastructure developments that we must keep a close eye on measuring the expenditures, etc. But, you know, I'm just going to share a personal story about having lived in the Netherlands, where I worked in a refugee camp in Oosterwijk, but lived about an hour and a half away in Breda. My commute to work involved public transit, the bus, the train, and my bicycle each and every day, and I loved it. And what I love about that is that it makes it possible to work somewhere without needing a car. And I know that students often don't have cars. Our younger generation might choose never to own a car. And we have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make the city as accessible and resistant to climate impacts that are negative on the environment. So I support inclusive transportation today and into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. Okay, same question for Courtney Walcott.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So my vision for the Calgary Transportation Network is founded on four kind of major tenets, and it's accessibility, affordability, connectivity, and safety. You see, for me, an increase in active transportation infrastructure, such as bike lanes, it allows for people who use wheeled mobility devices to better navigate roads, young people who bike to get to school safer, and for people who bike to get around the city, it makes it safer for them and easier than sharing the road with cars as it is right now. But that's only just the start, because we also deserve a better transit network. I'm from a city where I never had to check bus schedules because I knew one was coming within 15 minutes at every stop and at every corner. That's the level of frequency that will give Calgarians a true choice in how we get around. This includes an expansive LRT system with a completed Green Line, a train to the airport, and one day a train to MRU. And then my last part of this vision is one where we diversify the funding model of our transit system to such a high degree that we no longer have to rely on fare-based systems to use it. Calgary already has one of the best infrastructures for traveling by car. It's time to bring the other means of travel up to par. I did not mean that to rhyme.
Okay, thank you, Courtney. Cornelia.
So this is a great question about transportation. Thank you so much. This is how I feel about that. How we move citizens through our city is an extension of how we value their needs, their time, their safety, and their tax dollars. We have to stop making emotional decisions, and the Green Line is a really great example of this. When we look at the data, we have to ask, will this connect communities to where they need to be? Will this reduce our carbon emissions? Does the research show that people will use this route? And can the cost to build be paid back through ridership? If the answer is yes, let's fund it. If the answer is no, we need to find another solution. I believe we need to replicate this type of pragmatic thinking for other projects. For example, why don't we have a link to the airport? Major cities throughout Canada and North America have links as such from downtown to their airports. What about a train to Banff? Not only is a train to Banff good for our environmental health, it is good for our physical and mental health too. Regarding bike lanes, which I believe we should start to look at as mobility corridors, because they are used by folks who choose to ride, who choose to e-scoot, seniors who use mobility aids through the Beltline. We do need to focus on those types of mobility corridors for safety. And we need more safety patrols for our ridership of transit and downtown streets. Those are the pieces that really matter to me when it comes to public transportation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cornelia. Now we'll hear from Natalie Winkler.
Thank you so much. This is an excellent question, and one that is constantly evolving as Calgary has grown from a city of only 600,000 people in 1983, with current estimates to be that we are at 1.6 million people call Calgary home. That many people over a large amount of space requires an efficient and cost-effective transportation network, one that will allow us to travel through the city with ease. We need to connect all the quadrants of the city so we're not divided. My opinion is that we need to get moving on the Green Line. The costs are only going to get more expensive the longer we wait. I would like to see the south leg of the Green Line go down all the way to the new South Health campus, as was originally proposed. Then connecting Quarry Park to downtown is important to allow those that live downtown or be able to connect to offices and businesses in Quarry Park and vice versa, and then eventually making a connection to the airport, 100%. We may have to reconsider the cost of tunneling under the river in order to afford to go to the airport. And I'm willing to look at this. I think most Calgarians are on board for getting the best value for their dollar. Also, I would look at how to connect Mount Royal University with more BRT lines and better bike lanes. There needs to be at least one more pedestrian bridge overpass over Crowchild Trail. Crowchild Trail, really divides the city, as does Glenmore Trail. So my vision includes solutions for the
30 seconds.
LRT expansion, bike lanes, rapid bus lanes, pedestrians and cars. And I too listened to the radio this morning, and they talked about efficient transportation and not having to rely on a schedule. And once ridership is up, just like Courtney said, we could have buses come by every 15 minutes, and I would be on board with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalie. We'll now hear from Yogi Henderson.
Hello. As you know, as a civil engineer, transportation falls within the umbrella of civil engineering. So I feel this would be an area where I could add a lot of value, especially when you're doing cost analysis on any future developments. Just to be clear, when you talk about topics like this, I think it's important to put it in the context of all these other competing issues that we're considering, and I think we need to be wary about over-promising and under-delivering here when we talk about the pace we could build out some of these networks. So I know I really enjoyed Paul's first comment there. He has brought up some great points, and I know he's got some good ones being a house builder that he can bring to the front there to consider. So I'm all about slow right moves instead of quick wrong ones. I think there's a lot of great ideas out there, and I hear a lot of them from a lot of people here. So I'll just leave it at that. And yeah, that's my response to that question.
Okay, thank you, Yogi. We will now move to the rebuttal phase of this question. Each candidate will have a maximum of 1 minute to respond to the answers from the other candidates. And we will begin back with you, Yogi.
Yeah, as again, there's a lot of great responses there, and Paul, again, I'm just going to re-echo what I said there. I really liked his thoughts there, and I know he brings a lot of good ideas on the housing front. But as far as I need to see the costs on some of these. People are talking about doing things and just being the average Joe citizen here looking to make a difference. I would need to see those costs up front and weigh them against other competing things we'd like to do. I think we all got to realize that we have a zero-sum game here. So if we're going to take money to develop, a really robust infrastructure here, we have to ask that same question: where are we going to be taking that money from? Because I don't think people want to see higher taxes here. There's a big change going on here. Looking forward to being a part of it. Transportation obviously is one of them. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Yogi. 1 minute for you, Natalie.
So much. Yes, definitely wonderful responses. I'm so privileged to be among this group of candidates. It's really important with transportation that we consider a post-pandemic Calgary. Right now, every ride on transit is subsidized, and we don't want that to continue. So it's all going to tie in with a holistic approach to how do we bring vibrancy back to downtown? How do we get cars off the road? How do we harmonize and connect our city so that we're not divided by highways? But we also need to make allowances for all forms of transportation. That's harmonious bike lanes, proper parking for cars if people choose to ride their cars, the LRT, and the Green Line. And we need to look at costs. And as I mentioned, tunneling under the river has been expressed to me by numerous residents saying they have great concerns over the ongoing costs with that. So I'm willing to relook at the projects and find out what would be the best value for Calgarians, and I don't want to delay this. Every major city needs a good transportation.
Okay, thank you. We will now hear from Cornelia.
Thank you. So I would like to just make a point about Gary Bobrovitz and his Bucka ride. Sounds a lot to me like Doug Ford's plan for Bucka beer. I am not really sure that right now is the time to be looking for catchy buzz phrases to increase ridership. We are still in a pandemic, and I believe that COVID health restrictions are actually a large part of why our ridership is stagnant. And so we need to deal with our health issues before we can work on ridership issues. Continuing to make health and safety a priority is the only way forward currently that I see. And I do want to talk about subsidization, because I know Courtney Walcott talked about possibly making transit free. And while I think that's a great idea, I know a lot of folks who don't mind paying for transit if they can afford it, and those who need help should receive the help they need. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Cornelia. We'll now hear from Courtney.
Appreciate it. I think that one of the biggest theories that needs to be kind of discussed when we talk about building out our infrastructure systems is actually this concept of induced demand. I think for a long time, people like to talk about whether or not ridership will actually pay for itself in the end. But just like driving, every time you build a new lane on the highway, trust me, you're going to get more traffic. So what we do is if we create these systems in place and show people that they are honestly valid and real choices, people will actually take advantage of them. And the e-scooter program is a perfect example of this. The moment we put them on the street, all of a sudden they are everywhere and well used because we took a shot on something that is proven to work. Transit and transportation networks work. We just actually have to go ahead and build them so that people can actually use them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Courtney. Monique, you have 1 minute.
Sure, thank you. You know, as far as I'm concerned, both Courtney and Natalie have made some excellent points. I really value and respect the level of detail that Natalie has brought into her analysis and rebuttal, and I think Courtney makes some great points too. The only piece that I would refute, and this is with some limited stats to back it, but I have heard some controversy about having a line to Banff from Calgary with regard to the environmental impacts and the ecosystems that would be impacted by a direct line from Calgary to Banff. So I throw that out there as a caution. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Monique. Gary, you've got 1 minute.
Thank you, Dr. Bratt. Well, if I want to go skiing, I'll take a train to Banff 2 times a year. But if I'm going to classes at Mount Royal University, I'm going to take the LRT system twice a day to class and back home. Can we afford this project? My view is, can we afford not to have this project? And my Bucka ride is designed to get more people on the system to make it more affordable and more accessible. I'm running to be the councillor in Ward 8 in Calgary. I'm not running to be the councillor in Toronto. Thank you, Cornelia.
Okay, thank you, Gary. And the last rebuttal goes to Paul. You've got 1 minute.
Hey, thank you very much. And thank you to the other candidates. There's some great ideas that are out there. And as I've said before, I actively support the existing LRT system. I think we've got a really big risk that we're facing with the potential Green Line. You know, the costs at $12.5 billion aren't justified or do not justify building that line. I could support the south half where there's no, as Natalie said, there's no tunneling under you know, through an underground river as we've got in downtown Calgary. So I think we have to look at this as whether we can build brilliant transportation systems, but should we be building them to the point where they collapse our financial situation? That's very concerning to me.
10 seconds.
And so I like looking at different options. E-scooters are great, but they don't cost us anything. And when you're putting the city in financial risk, we need to be risk mitigators on city.
That's time, Paul. Okay, that concludes question 1. We will now go to the second question. What actions would you propose City Council take to both expand the supply as well as reduce the costs of rental housing in Calgary? Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer, followed by a 1 minute rebuttal, and we will begin with Paul Bergman.
Hey, thank you very much for the question. You know, I think that we can do a variety of things to help the housing situation. Specifically, we can cut red tape. The building industry believes that city red tape and regulation adds about $50,000 per door. We can cut the top-heavy administration, which I think is important to do. The Planning and Development Department has many talented people, but it can add substantial costs. And we need to address the process of adding a legal suite to people's homes. So the difficulty of getting building and development permits is a real cost to adding housing and low cost or affordable housing. I will spend some time, if given that, to talk about my unihouse.ca housing project, which I have built to bring affordable student housing to the market. So I've taken actual action to put this into play. Again, go visit my housing project at unihouse.ca. That's a great solution to student housing affordability. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. We will now hear from Gary Bobovitz.
Thank you, Dr. Bratt. I lived in student housing for about 7 years when I was taking my 2 master's degrees. And it was kind of fun, but I had to live with 4 other people because we could not afford any other type of housing. I think students should not have to worry about next month's rent. I think students are at university so they can focus on their studies, do well in the classroom, and learn. My proposal will be that the city should supply incentives to developers to build projects to dedicate 15% of their units to below market rentals exclusively for students so that they have a safe and secure place to rest their heads and enjoy their lives. I also want to ask and push for the provincial and federal governments to increase the supply of housing because they have access to larger pools of capital, and we can work in a joint venture project so that we can bring more affordable housing, not just to students, but to all marginalized Calgarians who can't afford housing, because we live in one of the most expensive housing markets in the country, even though we're still battling the recession and COVID-19. I also want to remedy issues with the provincial government with the Residential Tenancies Act and other legislative regulations. They haven't done their job to protect tenants, both during the pandemic and since they took office. And we need that along with the Landlord, Tenant, and Advisory Board to protect renters. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. We'll now hear from Monique Auffrey.
Thanks for the question. It's an area I'm most passionate about. Most people who know me know that I've worked for 25 years in housing and homelessness, in particular with vulnerable populations such as women fleeing domestic violence, women with children fleeing domestic violence. I've worked in shelters in Calgary and in Halifax, so affordable, accessible housing is pivotal in my work personally and professionally. I think that the city needs to keep a close eye and commitment to Calgary Housing Corporation and make sure that housing stock and end of life cycles are looked at and considered. I also think that there's a big difference between housing affordability and what we mean by affordable housing. Affordable housing is 30% of one's income. And in Calgary, that's difficult to find. I know that there is some controversy with regard to new developments in Ward 8 in particular, and whether we're doing enough to increase the affordable housing stock versus gentrifying neighborhoods. I would work very closely to make sure that in examples like Richmond Green, where a parcel of land is sold for the purpose of development, that development be considered for affordable housing and making sure that it's safe and accessible. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Monique. We'll now hear from Courtney Walcott.
Again, thank you for it's a great question. I grew up in rental housing almost all my life. So for me, when you look at the city, it starts in a very straightforward place. It starts with purpose-built rental housing. That means that we're actually building places where the target audience are renters. And again, I echo Monique in the sense that we cannot keep making rental housing and housing affordability versus affordable housing synonymous. They're different. There are people who just choose to live in rental housing because that's the lifestyle they want, just as much as there are people who need rental housing because of the affordability that it offers. So for Calgary, we have built Calgary for a very long time to be a place where homeowners are valued above renters. But the future of Calgary is an urban city where there is a balanced mix of rental housing in and across the city, rather than centralizing it all and say something like the Beltline or just the inner city. So if we're going to expand and reduce the cost of rental housing, we need to ensure we are balancing the scales of housing choice across the city and equitably. This means having the city release more of our own city lands to Calgary Housing Company to build further affordable rental units, but it also means allowing for more apartments, duplexes, row house, secondary suites to exist across the city so that we can actually increase the supply, which will inadvertently reduce the cost. And the city needs to join in the national movement for vote housing and recognize housing as a human right that needs to come with rental, leasing, and eviction protections. This means working with and advocating to the province to change how Alberta legislates protections for renters. Calgary is changing, and it's okay because we're going to make sure that we have the options for the demographics that are coming to our city, that are staying in our city, that are growing in our city.
10 seconds. Thank you, Courtney. We'll now hear from Cornelia Wiebe.
This is a really great question about housing, and I'm happy to answer it in this way. We need greater urgency to address this. This city should be an affordable city, and if it's not, people will leave. I think this city council needs to think of the dire consequences of this more than they have and more than they do. I'm frustrated where we are today. I think we have too many fancy reports that scope the problem and don't offer any solutions. And I think we're going to work ourselves into a crisis and make poor decisions. We need to broaden how we see those looking for affordable housing in this way. We cannot have a system, one system, for those on the homelessness spectrum or the hard to house in the same category as new graduates looking to purchase their first home or rent a place in the community that they want to call home. Those barriers are just different for all of those folks. What we have now is one system that tries to navigate all of our problems. This needs to be a priority of the Housing and Finance Committee. Currently, it sits somewhere else and is seen as a shared challenge with the province, which I think is just a way for the city and the province to say it's their problem. Well, nothing gets done. This is a city issue, and we need to acknowledge that. We are short 15,000 units for low-income housing. We need to build that housing, the housing that we need. We need these types of units for those that want into the market and need into the market. When we build the units we need for the capacity and demand, we'll see a correction in cost. It's standard supply and demand for housing and affordability. I thank you for that.
Okay. Thank you, Cornelia. We'll now hear from Natalie Winkler.
Thank you. Everyone should have a roof over their heads. Having a lack of affordable housing puts Calgary at risk. We want people to build a future in our city, so every quadrant of our city needs to have various housing options, including affordable housing, below market rate rentals, or subsidized housing. This is how our city will remain diverse and vibrant. We need to provide housing options for low-income families and individuals, single parents, seniors, immigrants, our Indigenous population, and students. Council should look at what types of housing Calgarians require now and in the future. I recently signed a petition calling for Calgary to research housing requirements, a supply and demand study. What type of housing? A strategy to implement this could be preserving some of our affordable rental stock that we already have. The 1950s bungalows, often they provide affordable housing. I can see that the tax benefit of tearing these down could benefit the city. However, these older affordable homes are torn down and replaced with fancy new condos that sometimes remain empty. Perhaps there is a compromise with the developer if they are permitted to rezone a property with approval, only with approval from the surrounding stakeholders and the community association, then a certain number of affordable housing units should be provided to Calgarians with the project. And I want to highlight that Calgary is doing some great things, converting some of the empty downtown buildings into affordable housing with the partnership with Home Space. They are providing 80 units of affordable housing, new retail, and a shelter. It's called Sierra Place. The city has also pledged $5.5 million into that project. And a new affordable housing building is going to be built by Home Space in Seton. These are steps in the right direction. I think working a private public partnership would be a great idea to move this forward.
Thank you, Natalie. And now we'll hear from Yogi Henderson.
Yes, I'd just like to Yeah, comment. Monique, you've done some work on the homelessness front, and I have too with the United Way. I've seen a lot of that up front, and how many Calgarians are just 2 paychecks away here from real financial difficulties. And so in that context too, I just like to add to Gary, it's not just the students who feel the pinch of a penny here. It goes well beyond that, well beyond their student years. So as an engineer, I have a lot of interest in good quality home building and not cheap and stuff. And in that context too, I would, I really enjoy what Paul has to say and would welcome his input as a lifelong builder, being involved in that. Just as important back on the homelessness front too, I think it's important for people to realize too that we can't eradicate homelessness. We can just mitigate it. And anyone thinks that we can eradicate it, I think that's a great goal. But in practice, that's not really plausible. There's a lot of mental illness out there. So there's a lot of complex solutions out there to what is actually a complex problem. So I just be careful for people oversimplifying the solution to what is a complex problem here. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Yogi. So that concludes the answers to question 2 around rental housing. We'll now go for a 1-minute rebuttal to the answers from the other candidates, and we'll begin with you, Yogi Henderson.
I don't got a lot to add to that. I think it was Courtney, mentioned back on the transportation front, just you build the extra lanes, it's going to attract more cars. I don't think that's true. Actually, you could probably make a pretty good argument out there that we've overdeveloped our roadways now based on the new vehicles that are traveling our roads. But just put that back in the context of buildings, slow right moves over quick wrong ones. I see some good ideas here from Paul and Natalie. I would expect to come out of there, and I would be interested in adding my own value to that so we can get a proper solution to the problem.
Okay, thank you, Yogi. We'll now hear from Natalie Winkler. You have a minute, Natalie.
Thank you so much. The one thing I wanted to add was we have to be careful about when a developer says they are building purpose-built rentals. These are market rate rentals. And if you're looking at a 2-bedroom, it could be as high as $2,500 a month or $3,000 a month. That is very expensive. That is a mortgage. So you're not going to have long-term tenants. There's going to be high turnover and people aren't going to want to put roots down in the community. So when I talk about affordable housing, we need to look at below market rate rentals and providing real affordability for Calgarians. The project that I mentioned in Seton, it's 20% below market rate rentals. We need to look at other cities like Toronto and Vancouver. What have they done for relative affordability in those cities? And Calgary, as we grow, I mentioned we need to do them in all quadrants. So I just caution when we talk about purpose-built rentals that we look at also preserving the purpose-built rentals that we already have that are built, the older ones that are affordable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. We'll now hear from Cornelia Wiebe.
Thank you. So I do just want to touch really quickly on something that Yogi said about how we cannot eradicate homelessness because we do have concerns in terms of mental health and addictions. And I would agree with that. I know that in my campaign, I have spoken a lot about prevention and really trying to help people before they are finding themselves in those situations. And that also, to his point about not just students, but many Calgarians are 2 paychecks away currently from really financial difficulties and distress, and may also find themselves in a situation where they are no longer in their home. That again really is going to fall under my my economic leadership when we talk about fostering better business here and small business and making sure that Calgarians can work. So we're supporting everyone who wants to work and wants to be able to care for themselves and their family. Thank you. Thank you,
Cornelia. We will now hear from Courtney Walcott. Courtney, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. I guess my challenge on 2 fronts is, one, when we start talking about slow right moves, I would just love for anybody to point to me a slow right move that has ever actually happened and been successful. Because it seems that we're at a certain point right now where we've been making slow right moves for 100 years, and we are continually seeing these same issues over and over again, repeated and repeated. On the second front, I just really would like to stress to all the candidates here to kind of like remove yourself from almost universally equating rent and rental housing with poverty. I was like, there are people who choose to rent because it is a lifestyle choice, because the down payment for a house is just something that we're not interested in doing, especially with regards to transitions of generational wealth. There are just people who choose
10
to rent
seconds.
every single day, and they deserve high quality rental options in a holistic way so that there are also affordable rental options for those in need. It's about everything. It's not just about one or the other, and I'm hearing a lot of that.
Okay. Thank you. We'll now hear from Monique Auffrey.
Thank you. Great place for me to chime in here, Courtney. I was 48 years old before I ever became a homeowner here in Calgary, so I can certainly appreciate what you're saying about stigmas against renters. I've rented in Sinalta for 6 years. I've rented in Bankview, and now I am privileged enough to own a home in Killarney. I do want to say, though, that housing is not only a municipal issue, it's also a provincial issue and a federal issue. I had the privilege of sitting at the National Housing Strategies roundtables a couple of years ago, and I think it's our job as city councillors to work together collaboratively to also augment the conversation at City Hall and to work well at leveraging our ability to navigate and negotiate with the province and
10 seconds.
And with the feds to get the very best deal for Calgarians. That's really my piece. Thank you. Oh,
Thanks, Monique. Oops. We will now hear from Gary Bobovitz. Gary,
Thank
you have
Duane.
1 minute.
When I came to Calgary, I bought a house in the middle of Ward 8, right behind Western Canada High School. I could not afford to buy that house today. And my 2 children, who were born and raised in that family home, could not afford to buy that house today. And that is unacceptable. Yes, you can rent. It's a great lifestyle, but rents are as expensive as mortgage payments. So it's a double whammy for a lot of people. I think that we have to put more resources into housing because that is one of the primary movers of the brain drain. When you can't afford to live here, and you're challenged for a job, you're not going to stay. So I really believe that City Council has to take a leadership role, working with the provincial and federal governments to provide more affordable and more attainable housing for everybody, not just students. There's a lot of people that are right on the edge of the housing bubble, and they need somewhere to live as well.
That's time. Thanks, Gary. And now we'll hear from Paul Bergman. Paul, you've got 1 minute. You're muted, Paul.
Sorry about that. Thank you. We've had some fantastic promises about housing from a variety of candidates here today. And I think it's a little more complex than simply saying that we will do it. As somebody has said, there is a variety of government levels involved, and it's not necessarily a city mandate. It's not a city under our jurisdiction under the Municipal Government Act. Having said that, I think there's some great ideas that were thrown out there as well. There is a difference between rental and affordable. Everybody does need a roof over their head. There are lots of mental health issues in this space. And talking about making slow right moves. I think the only way to have a substantial impact to bring up truly affordable housing to the market is to have the city throw in a piece of the land component for free. Developers will not do it. They will not do it. And I know that from experience. The city needs to take the assets they have and put them into play. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. That concludes our discussion on question 2 about rental housing. We will now take a short 5-minute break, and then when we come back, we'll be looking at question 3. So we'll see you in 5 minutes. And we will be posting the third question. Okay, so we have heard consistently over the past couple of years about young people leaving Calgary and Alberta. What would you propose City Council do to help retain young people in Calgary? And we will begin with Paul Bergman.
Thank you very much. I'm probably not going to give an answer that's going to make everybody on this call happy today. The majority of the job creation responsibility falls on the shoulders of the provincial government because they control the majority of the taxation policy and job creation policy. The mandate of our city council falls under the Municipal Government Act, and it basically encompasses about 6 points. It covers pipes in the roads, roads themselves, fire, police, garbage collection, parks, and some amenities spaces, but it does not cover job creation. Having said that, I think what's happening in our city is quite amazing right now. I think we need to recognize that our city is becoming, once again, after a 5-year lull, a really hotbed for tech companies and other issues around job creation. Recently, our Calgary Economic Development Authority held a job fair, and there was approximately, 45 tech companies and 1,000 people looking for work. We have a great incubator system happening in the city of Calgary. Recently, there was an announcement about 4 major incubators that are bringing lots of industry to this city.
30 seconds.
I'd encourage everybody to remember that we are actually doing a great job and creating lots of jobs in Calgary at this point in time. And I look forward to that continuing, yes, certainly with some help from the city council, but again, mostly provincial and federal job creation programs. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you, Paul. We'll now hear from Gary Bobovitz. Gary, you've got 2 minutes.
Thank you, Duane. The brain drain is real, and I know because I covered it as a reporter for Global Television, and my own 2 children are part of that brain drain. We've had 5 consecutive quarters of net loss migration. That means thousands of people have left the city since the spring of 2020. And Paul, City Council can do something about it. They can promote the city. They can promote its young, highly educated workforce. All they want is a chance. They want an opportunity for a job. I would promote a new investment fund for the city of Calgary that would offer grants of $50,000 to young people who want to start their own business. You got a great idea? That's how Apple started. And I think we can continue to do that. We have a high-tech industry that is growing. We have a film industry that is growing. We got to think outside the box. Oil and gas is great, but it's going the way of the dodo bird. And we have to learn to be creative, be part of the new economy, be ahead of the curve, make the city more livable. That means bike lanes, cool cafes to hang out at. That means patios along the Red Mile. We should have a city that people want to come to, that want to live here, to start a career, buy a house, and maybe start a family. And the city of Calgary has not done enough to sell itself and attract industry to our community.
Okay, thank you, Gary. We'll now hear from Monique Auffrey.
Thank you. I really do believe that youth need to feel engaged. Youth need to feel engaged in the process, and they need to feel like they have a seat at the table. And it's up to us as a city to make sure that we are providing opportunity for that to take place. I also think the city needs to change the narrative. I think we're too prone to sort of espousing a negative view of an old narrative of Calgary, and I see that changing. I also think youth need to see themselves in that future, and youth hold dearly environmental aspects of their city and how we are adhering to climate change. They want to see the arts thrive. They want to see a revitalized downtown. Those are all important things, but youth also want to feel safe in the city. and we have been hearing more and more about the impacts of the opioid crisis on our youth. We have also been hearing so much more about the mental health impacts of COVID on our youth and what that has meant to this generation of young people, not just the youth in university or people in their early careers, but young children, and what that will look like in the years to come. I think, Paul, to your point, the city's biggest expense line is actually on its people. We have a $3.8 billion budget, and $602 million of that budget is spent on its people, community and cultural services. And we need to make sure that we don't see the
30
budget
seconds.
allocated to those important social programs eradicated. We need to make sure we're looking at outcomes, but we certainly can't ignore it. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. We'll now hear from Courtney Walcott. Courtney, you have 2 minutes.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much for this great question, because this is actually, long story short, how I started out in this journey to be a city councilor. Because as a teacher, I see this trend every single year. At the end of grade 12, most of my students, they graduate and they go into a different city, right? And it's they're not seeing the opportunities that were once here. And I think the hardest one to pinpoint for a lot of young people when I'm having these discussions is they don't see the culture they want to immerse themselves in. So the first question I ask to my students is, where are they going? And almost universally, it's every other major urban metropolitan city in our country. So if we're going to keep young people here, then it starts with just listening to what they want. And here's what I'm hearing myself. It starts with a vibrant and thriving downtown core, that it's a cultural center that embraces the diversity of a modern city. This means investing in our creative sector, creating more urban living environments in the core, expanding our cultural districts, and increasing the scope of festivals and events that we invest in. But that's only part of it. And this is where I agree with Paul, especially because we do need to ensure that they succeed here as well. This means that we're investing in the industries that are driving the innovation of the next generation. And we need to capitalize on the energy transition, expand our film and media industries, deepen our commitment to entrepreneurship by creating the conditions for success. But we also need to make sure that we're electing leaders that are prepared to engage in the issues that we are facing right now. Things like what we've seen in the last 2 years, like anti-racism, things that we've seen in the last 2 years, like anti-racism, the climate crisis, rising of populism. It's time that we change the culture. And I think a huge part of this is that we need them at the table. You know, I vowed from day one in this race to create a ward level youth council so that young people consistently have a voice in how we build this city, because I'm not interested in building for them. I want to build with them.
Okay. Thank you, Courtney. We'll now hear from Cornelia Wiebe.
Thank you for this question. And I can certainly say, as a parent of 2 teenagers who are now also looking at university options, I do concern myself greatly about whether they will see themselves here in the future to work and to live and play. So here are the 3 things that I believe we need to do to retain young people right now. And it's these 3 things, and they need to work in tandem. It is generating jobs in industry that our graduating classes see themselves working in. So that's cutting red tape for small businesses to start and grow here. We are a city of entrepreneurs, and we need to harness that. We need to unleash the power of Calgary's economic development and Invest Alberta to create policies and opportunities that bring the world to our city. We also need to let young people make money and be prosperous here. Second, we need to create spaces. We need to make our downtown area a place to live, work, and play. I could not agree more. A vibrant core is critical to our young people seeing themselves staying here. We need to invest in spaces and projects that are supportive of our arts and culture. And third, we need to be inclusive and responsive to community challenges. And by that, I mean, we need to restore pride in what this city is and what this city's values are. Fixing our public engagement process, investing in preventative interventions, ensuring LGBTQ2S+ and BIPOC voices are reflected in any decisions associated with diversity and inclusion. And we need to work together to achieve these goals. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cornelia. We'll now go to Natalie Winkler. Natalie, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. CBC recently reported that our population of 20 to 24-year-olds shrank by 5.5%, and I think that's where this question stems from. That's 4,400 people leaving the city, and this is a problem. So I moved to Calgary, not to repeat myself, when I was 23. It was where the best and the brightest of Canada's youth wanted to be. How do we recover this? I completed my undergrad degree in Ottawa, and being from Vancouver, I didn't feel at home in Eastern Canada. I also lived and worked in Toronto for a little bit. I also felt that Vancouver was becoming too unaffordable, so I couldn't move back. Vancouver's median home price is $1.26 million. This includes condos, townhomes, not just single family homes. Detached homes in that city, the benchmark price is $1.8 million. Why am I telling you this? Because in Calgary, our median home price for single detached homes is $511,000. Wow, that's half the price. I know Gary's saying his kids can't afford to come back, but have they looked at the Toronto market? This is what will attract youth to come back to Calgary. It's our relative affordability. And yes, Courtney, I'm also talking about relative affordability of rental rates. Calgary is much lower than other Canadian cities. So we talked about affordable housing, but our relative affordability and quality of life is what will attract our youth to come back. And I feel very strongly of this. If we stop selling our parks, as in the Richmond scenario, build and densify respectfully, communicate with neighbors, look at local area plans, keep neighborhood character alive, support local shops and restaurants, bring more corporate offices downtown, reduce taxes on businesses and residents. This would be the best scenario, along with the city council that makes decisions in harmony and inspires confidence in our city. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. And we will now go to Yogi Henderson. Yogi, you've got 2 minutes.
I'm going to come at this from a little bit of a different angle. Talking about young people, I know myself when I was in my 20s. To be quite frank, I wasn't interested in municipal politics. At the time, I did some tree planting up in Fort St. James, Prince George area. I was a keg waiter for over 10 years, and I was refereeing hockey, building my backbone there. And I was also running resorts down in Mexico, Mazatlan, Puerto Vallarta, and Cancun. And there I actually turned a cost center in Mazatlan into a profit center. So maybe I'll be a bit at odds with Gary there, just saying, about entrepreneurs at that age. I think, the young people need to be building experience, and I think they can do that under the umbrella of a good home with 2 strong parents in the family, and that's what's going to make our city strong. So any jobs that we have to create, I think, here, again, I don't think that's I'll agree with Paul on that too, that creating jobs isn't foremost issue here with councillors and city council. We got infrastructure and that to look after. So again, I want to have an environment here where young people are going to have fun here. They're going to get great experience, and then when they get in their 30s and 40s, they can build those strong, robust companies. But I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Yogi. Okay, we will now go to the rebuttal phase on this question of a youth brain drain. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to the answers they just heard from the other candidates. And we will begin with you, Yogi Henderson. You have 1 minute.
Yeah, you know what, I think I said a lot in just my first answer. You got me back to back here, but just a little background with me. I lost a dear sister in Delta, BC. A little emotional here. She was a single mother with three children, a 14, a 17, and a 19-year-old. And she, the husband wasn't in, or the father wasn't in the picture. So, and all 3 children have Métis status. So if you guys want to go there on that front, go there with me. But that's consumed the last 13 years of my life. And if you want to talk about 3 young children in a home and a young single mother trying to make it, I know a lot of the nuances on that. So I'm pretty happy to say the oldest one, he just recently, 2 years ago, I went to his graduation. He's with the Delta Police Force, and he got on. He's a proud serving police constable.
10 seconds.
And yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Yogi. We'll now hear from Natalie Winkler.
Thank you. And thank you for that personal story, Yogi. Gary talked about jobs. So now with the new pandemic, we can environment, we can work anywhere. So that is what is going to attract people to Calgary. And Monique talked about changing the narrative. And I think what she was getting at there is bringing a more positive narrative. I feel that we have been really negative about our city. And I view Calgary as the best city in Canada. And I would like everyone to look at it in a positive light, because we are doing wonderful things, and just having so many fantastic people running for Ward 8 shows that people are engaged and they care about our city. So it's in the right direction. And of course, Courtney is 100% right. We need to get youth to the table. Many of my volunteers are MRU students, and I talk about that in the next question. And they are explaining to me what they are thinking and what the city needs. And also, yes, as candidates pointed out, students do leave and explore new universities in other parts of the country or other countries. And that's important too.
That's time, Natalie. Okay, we will now hear from Cornelia Wiebe. Cornelia, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. So a topic I hear a lot from university students, sort of early 20s and into late 20s, is often about not just how they feel about staying in Calgary, but how they feel about staying in this province. And I think that's a really important topic that hasn't been addressed here today. And how really do we focus as a city council? How does city council focus on making Calgary a great place for kids and families and young people to want to stay? Because that's a really important piece that we need to, in a sense, we need to decouple from our provincial narrative and be the place, Calgary, the place that people want to invest in and they want to stay and work here and do good work here,
10 seconds.
Be entrepreneurial and set up roots here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cornelia. We'll now hear from Courtney Walcott. Courtney, you have 1 minute.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all, honestly. And I'm going to echo both Cornelia and Natalie in this sense that, this is true. This is a very negative conversation because in many ways, perception is reality, right? And it's how people perceive where we are is what they determine it to actually be. And the issues that I'm often seeing is that people are choosing places where they just feel that they can live a happier life. And what I know to be Calgary, what I know what we can have here, what I've got here, what I gained here, what I earned here, we can give that to the next generation. I think it's just about us. Again, now this is echoing Monique, is we have to make sure we're doing our job as leaders to change that narrative. And it is our job. As city councilors, it is our job to lead this city, guide it into the future so that we can show people what Calgary is, and truth be told, what it's going to be for the next 50 years with a group of good leaders at the table.
Okay. Thank you, Courtney. We'll now hear from Monique Auffrey. Monique, you've got 1 minute.
Thank you. Mount Royal community, young people listening in. I'm not going to speak to you from a paternalistic tone and speak at you. Actually, this is a call to action. Don't leave. Stay. Help us rebuild. Help us shape the narrative. Call any one of us at any point in time and get involved, either in our campaigns or with the elected officials. I'm going to tell you, as a CEO who's hired many young people over my years, I tell young people, you can get involved in your community. There's tons of places. We need you. We need your enthusiasm. We need your energy. We need your youth. Join a community association board. Volunteer at the United Way. We have space for you. And I look forward to what that's going to look like today and into tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. We'll now hear from Gary Bobrovitz. Gary, you have 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Duane. I want to work with young people, and I think there are a bunch of student jobs in the MRU IT program. What they need is capital to take those good ideas and put them into action. And that's why I'm proposing this entrepreneurial fund where you can get a $50,000 grant. And maybe they can help create jobs for themselves and their friends. I also worked hard to make Calgary a livable city. I helped to create the Lilac Festival. Our first year, we had 140 people. Now there's 140,000. It's the largest festival in Western Canada. And it shows that when a community comes together for a common purpose, we can achieve great success. I want to make Calgary a destination city in our city. Go to school at Mount Royal, take the LRT, come downtown, have a drink, eat a meal, and walk around and enjoy the nightlife in the inner city. And that's what I will try to promote.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. And we will now hear from Paul Bergman. Paul, you've got 1 minute.
Hey, thank you very much. And I really like the positive comments I hear about what's happening in our city. I think Monique's call to action is fantastic. So I really do believe we are on the right track already. You know, I would caution the people watching this broadcast here today to be wary of anyone who promises a whole lot. There's smart people at the table already. There's great things happening already. And I believe that if we could promise so much, a lot of those things would already exist. So don't be taken in by over promising, but do listen to the majority of the people on this call. There's some great ideas about creating jobs, and that's where
10
we have
seconds.
focus. And I think we are on the right path already. This should be a positive message because there are many opportunities for students in this city already. I hope you stay. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, we'll now move on to question 4. How will you ensure that input from underrepresented and/or marginalized groups is taken into account in council decisions, especially when such people are less able to attend council meetings? And we'll begin with 2-minute answers, starting with you, Paul Bergman.
Great, thank you very much. Quick turnaround here onto a different subject, and I'm happy to do that. I think there has been a problem with people being able to attend council meetings for quite some time. And during some of the last debates or hearings, there has been some suggestion about how to change that, maybe put it into evening hours, maybe take those meetings out into the communities themselves. And I would certainly support both of those issues or ideas. And I think with regards to marginalized people, I would love to hear more from the folks that are more marginalized. And I'm hoping that when we change those council meetings, that we will hear from more people. Because in my attendance at the council meetings to date, it really, it doesn't represent the full spectrum of people that live in the city. So anything we can do to encourage those people to come to those debates or those hearings is greatly appreciated. So we need to get the word out. We need to be proactive in engaging those folks and getting them out to meetings at all opportunities. One of my commitments that I've made, actually 2 of my commitments, is that if elected to serve the residents of Ward 8, I would have monthly town hall meetings in community in Ward 8 at various communities. And I would devote hours every week.
30 seconds.
I would devote hours every week to returning phone calls. Those 2 pieces are very important when it comes to community engagement. And that's a big part of making sure that those marginalized groups are heard. Please get in touch with me. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. We'll now hear from Gary Bobovitz. Gary, you've got 2 minutes.
Thank you, Duane. The problem with city council meetings is that it forces Calgarians to come to City Hall. That's stuck in the 1970s. We have to take City Hall to the people. Yes, town hall meetings, a great idea, but let's do them virtually. I commit to a virtual town hall meeting 4 times in a year, every quarter, so that people know exactly what sort of business has been conducted at City Hall. And then they can provide their input to me, and I can take those great ideas back to City Council in those council chambers and develop positive public policies. The bottom line here is that there are many marginalized people that are intimidated by city council. They are afraid of City Hall because they see it as a power establishment. We have to de-revolutionize that so that it's more accessible to more people, that we are talking in a common language so that people can feel that they are part of the solution, that they can participate in decision making. Remember, municipal government is the closest government to the people in all of Canada. The federal government is removed, the provincial government is removed, but city council is right here on McLeod Trail. And your city alderman should live in your community, should be part of your community, should know the issues and the concerns in your community. And to do that, you have to live in Ward 8, and I have for more than 40 years.
Okay, thank you, Gary. We'll now hear from Monique Auffrey.
Hi.
Monique, you've got 2 minutes.
Thanks again. I'm going to take this from a different perspective. I believe that City Hall has many examples of the voices of community represented by community organizations who serve marginalized individuals in abundance. And this is about us as city councillors demonstrating back to the community that we have listened and we have implemented the strategies and recommendations that they bring to our attention. So for example, Vibrant Communities Calgary has done a lot of work in this area. CCVO has done a lot of work in this area as well. And the White Goose Flying Report has multiple recommendations that are ready for implementation. My commitment to the city and to the residents of Ward 8 is that I'll hit the ground running in advocating for the pieces that have been put right in front of us already from community. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. We'll now hear from Courtney Walcott. Courtney, you've got 2 minutes.
This question's a bit personal for me because I spent the last year and a half, 2 years, really fighting for representation at the table for a variety of different racialized and marginalized groups in the advocacy that I was doing at the city level. And the challenge that I kept finding is that, truth be told, is that when we're dealing with a colonial system, it's not built for people who don't experience the type of privilege that the system was designed for. So as much as we have these conversations about town halls and hours of viewership, the realities is that these systems are not usually speaking the same language of the marginalized or racialized or underprivileged groups that we are seeking to bring into these council decisions. You cannot just ask someone who has been actively alienated from a system to all of a sudden become a part of it. It is actually our job as leaders to do the work to go out there and meet people where they are. So for me, this is a huge part about actually building coalitions with local community leaders, inviting them into discussions on city building long before it ever gets to council meetings, taking the advice of community leaders in how we actually handle our business and how we handle our day-to-day processes, including moving beyond just, say, for example, the live stream on City Council's website to a more accessible social media with a variety of language and accessibility features. We can also move beyond this conversation of you come to me and make it our purpose, our job to actually reach out to communities that do not often find themselves represented in the data that we collect as from people who are participating in council meetings. It's outcomes based.
10 seconds.
Right? We have to decolonize the system if we're ever going to actually make it one that represents something for everybody else. For everybody.
Thank you, Courtney. We'll now go to Cornelia Wiebe. Cornelia, you've got 2 minutes. Cornelia, you're muted.
Thank you for this question, and thank you, Courtney, for sharing your story. I followed your work quite a bit last summer, and it's really important. We have a long way to go, and I think part of that challenge is really asking who needs to be at the table for these conversations, right? City Council needs to have all stakeholders involved in decision-making processes if we're going to move the city forward in a way that serves all Calgarians. So we do need to put open call-outs to working groups so that we can have conversation with as many people as possible. And I agree, it is absolutely difficult and very challenging to access City Hall. We do have a broken system of engagement whereby only certain folks that have time in their day can, say, sit on the virtual call waiting for their chance to have their opinion or concern addressed through the virtual town hall, council meetings that we've had in recent months during COVID. And previously, you would have to go and sit and wait all day at city council chambers to have your opportunity to speak. And that's just not right. And it doesn't really allow space for folks that don't have that type of opportunity in their lives, whether it's work or other family commitments where they just don't have the time for that. So we really do have to work more collaboratively there with our communities. And I really am advocating for more engagement and better opportunities for involvement with our community associations. And I say that because our community associations really are the gateway to connectivity within our communities. And I'd like to see those community associations foster better community hubs for these conversations, for coffee parties, for things where we can really just get to the heart and soul of our communities and really try to dig down and address community issues and have as much involvement and engagement as possible there. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Cornelia. We'll now turn to Natalie Winkler. Natalie, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. If I am elected as your next counselor, we will not have 3 days of marathon guidebook hearings that go on, and Calgarians that phone in will not be disrespected. I was really alarmed after I listened to all 3 days of the hearings for the guidebook. And as I think our counselor needs to represent the people of the ward, and please get their input and responses before this is turned to council, so we don't have arguments on the table. And not every Calgarian could call in. My time to speak was bumped 3 times. I was putting my son to bed at one point and I couldn't speak, or dropping the kids off for school. It's very difficult. We do need to keep the online format. I think that will make it more accessible. But who has access to technology? We need to look at having this open in libraries. And as Cornelia mentioned, our community associations are really important, but they are volunteer driven. I think they are really stressed out and overworked, and the counselor needs to help the community associations and work with them and not against them. And if we have a counselor that is accountable and is listening to the voices in the community, we should have a smooth running city council so that we are listening to the people, and listening to the residents of Ward 8 is the best part about this campaign. It's meeting the happy residents that want to share their concerns.
30 seconds.
It's been such a wonderful, positive experience, and I'm really excited to represent them and not have this acrimonious atmosphere where we are arguing at City Council, but that we know what to expect and that we have the engagement beforehand. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalie. And now we will go to Yogi Henderson. Yogi, you have 2 minutes.
I feel a little uneasy here without a candidate sign in the background here. But anyways, moving forward, one thing I learned with United Way over the years, and probably, you know, the strong undertow of the United Way is all about building strong communities. And I think if we're doing that on, you know, a broad scale, you know, trying to come up with ideas and solutions that are good for everyone, it will offer the solutions for those marginalized people you're talking about. I think to pander to them, as the legacy media does quite a bit, they give them overrepresentation. I'm not sure that's healthy for everyone, and you end up with a situation where the tail's wagging the dog, and that's not good for anyone. At the end of the day, you know, if they can't make it to meetings, you know, just going to have to trust me that as we need to have strong character people on council. And by character, I mean character. Best definition I had of character is what you do when nobody's watching. And, you know, as a hockey referee, you know, I've been in front of 15,000 people and they've all been yelling at me. But you know what? I'm doing the right thing. And the thing that drives that home is at the end of the game when people come and they still want Yogi in there refereeing the next game because he knew it was tough. And he'll make the tough decisions. And sometimes that means saying no. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you, Yogi. Okay, we've now heard each candidate answer the question about marginalized groups and council decisions. We'll now have a 1-minute rebuttal phase for each candidate to respond to the other answers that the other candidates provided. And we'll begin back with you, Yogi Henderson, for 1 minute.
Yeah, I just, like to remind the voters just to be careful here of the common trope of aspiring politicians who overpromise and underdeliver. We need to be careful of sound bites here that are, they're pretty catchy, but at the end of the day, they don't carry a lot of substance, and just endless promises, because at the end of the day, we have a fixed budget, and we'll cover that in a later and coming up topic. So as again, the legacy media needs to be careful here about just giving too much weight to loud minorities. I don't think it's helping anyone at the end of the day. I think, we can build this strong community and be the strong Calgary, attracting the right people that we want to attract. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Yogi. We'll now move to Natalie Winkler. Natalie, you have 1 minute.
I think a democracy is simple. It's listening to the people. It's listening to the letters you get, answering the emails. I've knocked on thousands of doors and people are frustrated. They've written letters to the current councillor with no response. They're getting so frustrated that, and all the candidates can attest to this, that they've reached out to the candidates about certain issues, such as the sale of Richmond Green. I think we have to be accountable to those that elect us. And I appreciate a little bit of what Yogi is saying, but these are not empty promises. I think these are the fundamental foundation of democracy, and I will never waver from that. So I will listen, I will respond to your emails, and I will be here and represent and fight for my ward. And I think that is the most important. And also, when we talk about marginalized groups speaking at council, we do need translators, and we need to make sure everybody can have their voice heard, or they can get in touch with the councillor beforehand to make sure they're represented. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. We'll now hear from Cornelia Wiebe.
Thank you. So I think we all need to really understand that, experts, academics, people with lived experience and still living their experience know what's really needed to address challenges in our city, and engagement is one of them. We've heard from this current city council many times that the engagement process is flawed, and there are a lot of obstacles, including family work-life balance, child care barriers that make, for some folks, a participation in our engagement process impossible to juggle. So I think we really need to come back to the people. We need to come back to Calgarians to understand where we can do better work on engagement. I don't have all of the answers to that question today, but I do commit to asking the right questions,
10 seconds.
Bringing as many people to the table as are possible to drive the best policy solutions and outcomes for all of us to be engaged. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Cornelia. We'll now hear from Courtney Walcott. Courtney, you have 1 minute rebuttal.
I would like to be very clear that equity in engagement and equity in council is not pandering to marginalized people or loud minorities. The honest truth is that our engagement system is exactly that. It's a system. It's designed. So if there exists within that design system marginalized people, it was an active decision that someone made at some point to value who gets to speak and how they get to speak. So as counselors, it is our job to correct that imbalance so that people who are marginalized will have their voices amplified in the way that counteracts the system that has put them into a position of marginalization in the first place. And I promise you, these aren't empty promises, because the coalitions that I built as a part of Defund to Fund last year alone brought together 18 marginalized and racialized communities, LGBTQ2 Spirit Plus, to advocate for the city to create the community safety investment framework that resulted in $16 million of funding. It's not an empty promise. It works.
That's time, Courtney. We will now hear from Monique Auffrey. Monique, you've got 1 minute.
Okay. I'm going to reiterate that this is about council talking less and taking action more, and operationalizing the recommendations that have already been put forward by community organizations. I really value what Courtney has shared, and I also am a woman of lived experience. Many people know me as a survivor of domestic violence, and I've used my voice to help elevate that conversation and to help others come forward. But really, at the end of the day, trust is broken, and we need to do our utmost to make sure that we are demonstrating back to the community that we are prepared to take the actions necessary. Enough talk, more action.
Okay. Thank you, Monique. Okay, we'll now turn to Gary Bobovitz. Gary, you have 1 minute.
The brutal honesty is that City Council and City Hall really are not listening to Calgarians. And the prime example of that was the sale of Richmond Green Park space. 2,000 people signed a petition saying they opposed it, and it was still approved. I insisted that that decision be kicked over to the next council, to one of us, so that we could be held accountable for that decision. The aldermen that voted for it are gone, and there's nothing we can do about it. And some of the candidates on this forum supported the sale of that green space. I opposed it 100%. I just live off 17th Avenue Southwest, and I have for most of my life. As a journalist, I go to the people to find out the stories. I walk the Red Mile. I hang out at the National.
10 seconds.
I go to the food court at Westbrook Mall. I meet with my Somalian friends at Tim Hortons, and I hang out with my people at E's Ethiopian restaurant. I want them to tell me what they want. I'm going to take their issues and concerns, and I have
time, Gary. And we will now turn to Paul Bergman. Paul, you've got 1 minute rebuttal.
Thank you very much. And it's great to see such good dialogue happening on this issue. I think there's some great ideas that the other candidates have put on the table. We do need to make this a more efficient democracy. And I think we've taken steps in the right direction. I think that, I think one of the candidates earlier suggested that we need to make the meetings virtual. In fact, they already are. We are taking steps, and City Council, much as I don't necessarily agree with some of their community engagement stances, I believe we need more community engagement. I think there is a movement at City Hall that we need to recognize is trying to bring marginalized and underrepresented people to the table. And I am so happy that those
10 seconds.
I'm so happy that those things are taking place. Let's give credit to existing council for the steps they've taken, and let's continue to move forward with getting these marginalized folks more involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. That concludes question 4. We will now move to closing statements. Each candidate will have 1 minute to make their closing argument. And we will begin with you, Paul Bergman, for 1 minute.
Great, thank you. I didn't know if we were getting more questions or not. Again, to reiterate just what I just said, there are some fantastic ideas that have been discussed here today. There's been a great amount of experience from different areas of live and work that are represented by the various candidates here today. And so I want to thank them for being in this race. I think it adds to the positive outcome that we will have at the end. But just to reiterate where my focus is and what I'm hearing in the community from the, again, thousands of doors that I've knocked on, community engagement is a big part of it. I think we've done a poor job so far, and we can do better, whether it be the guidebook or Richmond Green's park sale. I've spoken against both those issues.
10 seconds.
And I think that the other issues of crime and safety and better operating City Hall are also important. So thank you very much to everyone who has attended here today.
Okay, thank you, Paul. We'll now turn to you, Gary Bobrovitz, for 1 minute closing statement.
Thank you, Duane. I want to thank all the candidates for being here today, but I particularly want to thank the students of Mount Royal University, because I want to know what their issues and concerns are, and I will take those issues and concerns, use my political reporting experience and my community experience to create positive public policies. And the question they should be asking is, What can Gary Bobrovitz do for you as your Ward 8 alderman and councillor? I can promise you I'll create positive public policies. I will stop the anger and the acrimony and finger pointing. I will help City Council work better together because I think I can take a leadership role based on my 40 years covering City Hall. I can promise you I'll fight for more opportunities for a sustainable, inclusive, and livable city.
Thank you, Gary. We will now hear from Monique Auffrey. Monique, you've got 1 minute.
Thank you. My closing remarks are really to do two things. To thank you, Dr. Duane Bratt, and the members of the Mount Royal community, to the students who have taken an active leadership role in organizing today, and to all the viewers, along with the candidates. The second piece is, again, my second call to action. To all of you who are listening in today who have not made your decisions yet, vote in the change you want to see. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I'm so inspired to know that you are taking it so seriously. Thank you so much, and I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Okay. Thank you, Monique. We'll now turn to Courtney Walcott. Courtney, you have 1 minute for a closing statement.
Awesome. Again, I echo so much of the gratitude. I really do appreciate everyone being here, listening to us speak, and to all the other candidates, Sam RU, and of course, Dr. Duane Bratt. I appreciate you moderating. What I will say is, as we get to the end of this election season, it is about making sure that you are electing someone who is actually going to go ahead, do the homework, do justice to the decisions that be made, so that we can make sure that we're guiding Calgary toward a sustainable future. So please reach out if you have any questions, but also make sure that when you vote, you've done the homework to see which of us candidates are putting some actual action behind the promises that we're making. Because honestly, we sit here and at the end of this election, we're going to be guiding the city into a wonderful future.
10 seconds.
Vote your heart.
Okay, thank you, Courtney. We'll now turn to Cornelia Wiebe. Cornelia, you have 1 minute.
I will say the same as all of us here today. Thank you to Dr. Bratt and MRU for hosting this forum for us to come together and really have a chance to outline our platforms and how we would plan to lead on City Council. And for me, it comes down to, again, my small business and economic leadership. When we talk about vibrant communities, we talk about wanting places to live, work, and play. We talk about environmental sustainability and having access to shops, services, and amenities in our communities. We're talking about small business. And that is really a skill set that I would bring to City Council to foster some incredible opportunities for all of us to live here and enjoy a quality of life that we all deserve to have as Calgarians. Again, to highlight that I've been working in this space for many years in Ward 8, and I thank you all for your time here today.
Thank you, Cornelia. We will now turn it to Natalie Winkler. Natalie, you have 1 minute for a closing statement.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here. A couple points that I want to summarize for everybody is that I'm against the guidebook. I spoke out against it. I'm against Ward 8 selling our parks. I think that redevelopment and densification needs to occur respectfully, that neighbors and stakeholders have a voice. Community associations, you will have a voice. The councillor needs to represent the residents of the ward. I would vote for vaccine passports. We haven't talked a lot about the pandemic that we're still enduring and going through. Our hospitals are overflowing. We need to keep businesses open. Yes, I would have voted for that. Many people send me emails about that. And I also want to mention that I would work towards, there was a budgeting question that we didn't get to, and I would work towards doing a permanent art display on the steps of City Hall to commemorate the victims of residential schools. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Natalie. And we'll now turn to Yogi Henderson. Yogi, you have 1 minute for a closing statement.
My grandfather once told me it's a good thing we all have different opinions, because if that weren't the case, everybody would want your grandmother. So, with that as a backdrop, a lot of good opinions out there. And yeah, I just want to let all you students know out there that yeah, I'm a former student myself. I'm a tough hockey referee. You don't get to the NHL by not having a backbone. And I've had those fun years in my teens and 20s as a tree planter, as a keg waiter, running resorts in Mexico. I want you guys to enjoy the same good times that I had too. So there's a lot of things that made Calgary great, things that'll keep us great. I don't want to undo those things, but I do want to do some nuanced changes to some things perhaps once we do a cost-benefit analysis. And for that reason, I think I'm your best electable candidate here for councillor in Ward 8. Longtime resident here too. Have a good one. Cheers.
Okay, thank you, Yogi. That concludes today's all candidates forum for Ward 8. I'd like to thank all of the candidates and all of the attendees for showing up. You can view it later on Facebook and you can view it later on YouTube. I know there are still questions on the YouTube comment section and the Facebook comment section. The candidates may want to go in there and deal with some questions that are directly asked of them. On behalf of Mount Royal University and the Students Association of Mount Royal University, I think this was a very educational 2 hours. I know I learned a lot as a voter, and best of luck on October 18th. Thank you and good afternoon.